in this context, I'm an independent ecologist, but you will see I am working for a local authority in London. So the main aim for this presentation is to really kind of elevate what all of you guys are doing at the local level. So all the great projects and all the sort of yeah, all the kind of hard work that you're doing at the local level and kind of how it can really help me in the local authority level and other ecologists and policymakers across London. So let me just, let's see, how's that working? Okay, cool. So at a very simple level, we have three scenarios. So we have quite a lot of the first picture, increasing numbers of gardens that are being paved over for access for electric cars, or just because it's simple and neat, and because people not realizing the impact of this sort of garden. And then you've got in the middle, you've got, unfortunately, small numbers of amazing gardens like this one, that's got just full of vegetation, full of different plants. And obviously, the person that lives here loves plants. And then you've got the third picture that is actually probably the most, in the sense that a lot of people don't really think about their front garden. They're busy, it's a bit of soft surfaces, but it's unmanaged and probably could be a lot better. So then you've got sort of three actions with these three different types of garden. You really want to reverse the first one. How do we do this? How do we incentivize people to do that? We really want to protect, where possible, those amazing gardens from removal or changes in perception or use. And then we really want to influence the third one. How can we make these gardens better and prevent them from becoming tarmacked over? So what's the importance of that? Well, from a local planning authority perspective, it's really important from our side to see what's happening at more of a neighbourhood or ward level, and maybe even at a borough level. So this is a sort of bird's eye view of an area in Brent. You've got Welsh Harp on the right, which is a really important nature reserve. It's designated for all sorts of different things: site of scientific interest, local nature reserve, metropolitan open land, and a site of importance for nature conservation, which we call sinks in London. And then you've got Friant Country Park on the west side. That's again a metropolitan open land. It's also a metropolitan sink. So that being it's of importance at the London level, which is one of our best habitats. And actually that's the same with Welsh Harp. But what's happening in the middle, we have no idea. Um, the data, we don't have any data about private gardens or front gardens, and there's hundreds of them because, this is quite a large area, between the two sinks, but it's really important because they really are potentially connecting or separating between these two important nature reserves. Um, and yeah, from a sort of strategy or policy perspective, this could really make a difference to how we apply policy at a London level, or sorry, a borough level as well as London. So why is it important? Well, if you think about Brent, the majority, so the blue is private gardens in Brent, a few areas probably, but the proportion of gardens is significant. And at the moment, we don't know anything about this data. We don't know anything about the people, what they're doing. Is it chemical free? Is there a pond? Is there native plants? We have no information. And then if you think about that London wide, it's still important. It's not just one borough or another borough. Sutton for here has got just over 35% of their borough is in private gardens. Harrow and Croydon are really high. Lewisham and Kingston, you're still looking at sort of 30%. And then obviously City of London, because it's so tiny and very urban, very high rise, obviously it has a very small proportion. But you can see significantly a lot of private gardens that have massive biodiversity value in London. So this comes to mapping. So this is why I think mapping could be really helpful to kind of draw out what's going on at that local level. And if you keep it simple, it could really be not only really easy for people to sign up and to do the survey, but actually gives us a traffic light system, um, roughly what's going on at front gardens and back gardens. So this is a basic methodology that I tailored for front gardens because they obviously are slightly different from back gardens. But the idea is that keep it simple. How much hard standing do you have? What's the management like? Has there some native pollinator plants and then chemicals as well? And then that means you only have a very basic scoring system, and you can kind of use the kind of point where you get really great habitat, like the first picture, bright green, wonderful. And then you get things in between. You have, okay, but could be better, and then you have really bad. And that's the sort of idea. And if you think about that local community action, this is actually something you could really do. Front gardens are really accessible. You don't need to have permission. If you're on a footpath, you don't need, it's free. It's free for you to look. So you could go down lots and lots of streets and just map front gardens. And you don't need to get permission from that individual owner. So that's quite handy because then, if you're keen, you can do loads. And then maybe there's a point around how do we get people to actually understand what's going on. And I think here there's an element of slightly mild competitiveness, which I think is actually really helpful. If you knew your neighbor was green and you were red, does that impact on how you would do things? Um, Maybe there's another way we could do it. So this is an idea, what about amending? We all have to produce environmental performance certificate as part of, when you sell or buy a house, because it influences how efficient the house is to reduce costs when you rent it. So why not have a biodiversity performance certificate or garden biodiversity performance certificate? So the garden PC, sorry, GPC has been taken from. I have to sort of give support for two people that are on this call, Mark and Joyce, who that's their terminology for the same idea. And we know it can be incentivized. We know that when the government put in that 25 or 50p cost to bags within a supermarket, so Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Morrison's, how overnight the change of um, habit happened because it was just tiny amounts of money. So is there a way to do it where we do exactly the same thing? 20p off, a water bill, or 20p off something, just to get people to think differently, and just do a very basic survey. And then you get this nice pretty map and you can stick it on your window, as someone suggested on LinkedIn when I posted it a few months ago. Then you've got another way to do it. So depending on the mapping, you might get really nice areas of just beautiful gardens and lovely trees. So that could be, potentially a nature reserve. And they do have that idea in America. And I think other places around the UK, the wildlife trusts have had similar um, schemes, but there's never really been anything that's come out of them. There's no synthesis at a local, at a more strategic level. So they're nice projects, but we're just reinventing the wheel. We're not taking that and bringing it up to policy, legislation, designation levels. And I do think that's really important because we do need to bring this all together. There's so many people on this call, people feel very passionate about the importance. We all have a role here, but it's not being recognized. So yeah, depending on so in this case, super green, lovely connections, really helping to support nature recovery at a more strategic level, linking the nature reserves at either side. This can be a local thing, so through neighbourhood plans, you could identify important streets. You could do it at a borough or London-wide level by designating it as a SINC, so a neighbourhood nature reserve, which is another term that Mark and Joyce has highlighted, and I've taken it with permission on this presentation, because these all identify important streets that may help other people to follow suit. And then the picture of London on the left-hand corner is kind of saying, well, we could have a SINC or neighbourhood nature reserve in every borough because that would relate to the SINC network. But why not have a ribbon? Why not have a donut across the whole of London, linking between, the Green Chain route or the London Loop, which are those long distance walking routes, and think about how we could create a ribbon that becomes a sink of metropolitan importance. Some might be really some might be really important, like super amazing, like beyond incredible. And I'm sure people who create those gardens are actually really passionate gardeners and really want to protect and enhance. For example, there's a garden in Sutton, or loads of gardens in Sutton, because they're on chalk grassland. They have loads of orchids and loads of, like, wild species that, actually are in huge decline because their priority habitat is being removed. But in gardens, it's being protected. So that's an example of maybe where the protection would be relevant. But we also have things already in existence. So we have listed buildings as very standard designation or designations. Same with tree protection orders. They're there, they're normal, and we're very used to them. So why not have a listed garden? Why not have a garden protection order or a habitat that was recognized as something important? It's just an amendment of the designation. It's not creating anything new. Um, and we could also go into, thinking about the public house, changing what we'd call, the place to have beer, to have something more community and more up to date community use. So here you've got some kind of, trying to sort of graphically illustrate the networks that would be created at a local level if you share and connect and share plants and talk to your neighbors. And the front garden is a really good place for that because it's public and people walk past. And people like to chat to your neighbors through, talking about plants. And people love to get together. So it's a really positive relationship that could be considered community wealth, and link into local plan policy and community action. And I think the major issue we have, particularly around this new legislation called biodiversity net gain, is that everyone thinks that gardens are unenforceable. So therefore, it's, most of them are exempt from having to deliver a net percent of 10%. But actually, that's not true. I mean, we have the garden opening scheme where, people go along and enjoy looking at people's gardens, and then the money gets generated to support a charity. That if you did that, then it wouldn't be unenforceable. You could have that open a couple of times a year, and that would be fine. And likewise, a listed building is still private, but that's still recognised as an important designation, and they have to look at it and treat it with relevant you know kindness when it comes to building and adding different materials. So yeah, uh, yeah, so then we can move. Missing my point. Yeah, so we've talked about health and the value of that. And then the last idea, which is through sort of, I've been reading a few books recently, and there's a big movement at the moment around protecting rivers through the rights as a living entity. So I think maybe a couple of places like the River Wye have been recognized as a sentient being. So in this situation, if you think of the Brent River catchment, the whole river catchment would be needing to have some consideration for this living entity, which is the river that leads into the Thames. And by the protection of the catchment, perhaps there would be a need then to take a payment for any garden that was 100% concrete, unless they could reverse it and take away that hard standing to reflect the need for the flood issues, and all the kind of misconnections that happen that really affect pollution into these river courses. And that's it for me. So thank you for listening.